All right, let's dive right into one of the most important novels of the 20th century, Ernest Hemingway's 1926 masterpiece, The Sun Also Rises. And trust me, this isn't just some story. It's basically the definitive portrait of an entire generation that was completely set adrift. So, let's start with the question that is at the absolute heart of this novel. Imagine this. You've just been through the unimaginable trauma of World War I. All the old rules, the old beliefs, everything you thought was certain, it's just gone. This right here, this question, this is the dilemma that haunts every single person we're about to meet. And that leads us right to this crucial idea, the lost generation. I mean, what a name, right? These were the young people, artists, writers, just wanderers, who made it through the war but came out the other side feeling spiritually hollowed out. They were just cut loose, totally searching for meaning in a world that suddenly felt like it had none. Hemingway didn't just write about them, he basically defined them with this book. So where does this big search for meaning take our characters? Well, we bounce from the buzzing cafes of Paris to the raw, wild energy of a bullfighting festival in Spain. But hey, don't let the lively scenery fool you. The vibe here is way less about celebration and a lot more about distraction. It's like a frantic, non-stop, alcohol-fueled party designed to outrun this deep, quiet desperation that's always nipping at their heels. Okay, so let's meet the crew. At the center of it all, you've got Jake Barnes, our narrator. He's this stoic, watchful guy, but he's carrying a war injury that's left him with this deep, invisible wound, kind of symbolizing a new, damaged form of masculinity. And then there's Lady Brett Ashley. She is magnetic, totally independent, and just utterly chaotic. She's the picture of modern freedom, but it leaves her constantly restless. And to stir the pot, you have Robert Cohn, the romantic idealist, who just doesn't fit in with this cynical crowd. And finally, Pedro Romero, the bullfighter, who represents this pure, traditional, authentic manliness that all the other guys can only look at from a distance. So the emotional engine that drives this entire story is this absolutely impossible love. Jake and Brett love each other, no doubt about it. But his physical war wound creates this uncrossable divide between them. And this shows their core conflict perfectly. Jake's response is this quiet, stoic endurance of his pain. Brett's response? Constant motion, chasing one fleeting connection after another to escape the one true connection she can never ever have. And, this deep inability to connect, it leads directly into the next major theme of the book. Because when you can't face your own reality, what do? You run. And believe me, these characters are the ultimate escape artists. And they've got their routine down to a science. It's this relentless, predictable cycle. They bounce from Parisian cafes to just drowning themselves in alcohol. And then they chase the pure, violent thrill of the Spanish bullfights. For a split second, maybe, that inner emptiness creeps in. But before it can really take hold, boom, they start the whole cycle all over again. It's this constant performance to prove to everyone and themselves that they're really living, even when they feel completely dead inside. And this line from Jake, our narrator, just perfectly captures their whole struggle. The big why of life, it's gone. That grand purpose was shattered by the war. So all that's left is the how. How do you get through the day? How are you supposed to act? How do you come up with a personal code to live by when all the old codes have been totally destroyed? And this search for how to live, that brings us to something really crucial. It's not just about what these characters do. It's about how Hemingway tells their story. His writing style is every bit as important as the plot, and it reveals this whole other layer of meaning hiding just beneath the surface. And this is it. This is Hemingway's famous iceberg theory. The idea is so simple, but it was revolutionary. The real story, all the emotion, the trauma, the meaning, it isn't actually in the words you read on the page. Just like an iceberg, most of it is submerged, totally hidden from view. As Hemingway himself said, the dignity of an iceberg comes from the fact that only 1/8 of it is above water. So let's see how this actually works, because it's pretty brilliant. On the surface, what do the characters talk about? Simple stuff. Ordering another drink, where to go for dinner, how to get from one place to another. But what they don't say, that's everything. Beneath all that plain, restrained talk lies all the unspoken pain, the trauma of the war, the impossible love, and this crushing weight of their disillusionment. So this whole style is defined by being minimal. The writing is sharp, it's direct, the narration is really held back emotionally. See, Hemingway doesn't tell you the characters are in pain, he forces you to feel it in the empty spaces, in the silences between their words. And funnily enough, that makes their suffering feel so much more authentic and incredibly powerful. So, after all this running, all this drinking, all this unspoken pain, where do we finally end up? Well, the conclusion of this novel is one of the most famous in all of literature, and it's famous for one big reason. It absolutely refuses to give you a neat little answer. There's no big fix, nobody gets healed, no one rides off into the sunset. Instead, Jake and Brett are left alone, together in a taxi. And in that quiet, final moment, they finally drop the act. They acknowledge the heartbreaking truth of their situation, that damned good time they could have had, but no, they never will. And there they are, those final, absolutely devastating lines. You have Brett's wistful, painful thought, and then Jake's quiet, ironic, and just deeply sad reply. Isn't it pretty to think so? That's not him being cynical. That's acceptance. It's the sound of someone looking at an impossible dream and just acknowledging it, without letting it completely destroy them. And really, that's the central message of the whole book. Hemingway seems to be saying that life isn't always about getting what you want. In fact, it's often about what you're denied. True strength, what he would call grace under pressure, isn't about winning or finding some perfect happiness. It's found in just enduring the losses, the pain, and the unfulfilled dreams with a quiet, unwavering dignity. So we end right where we began, with a question. A century after this book was written, it still forces us to ask ourselves, in a world that often doesn't give us the neat answers or the perfect happiness we want, where do we find our own code? Where do we find our own grace? Isn't it pretty to think so?